Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Kyle. I'm a co-founder at Multicoin Capital. This is Tarek, co-founder and CEO at Kalshi, the largest prediction market in the US. Tarek, can we start off? You just tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. So we started the company out of MIT, and now people are talking about this sort of idea of prediction markets. But at the time, the notion of prediction markets was super niche corner of the internet. Where we really came at sort of the idea from, I spent time at Goldman Sachs and Citadel, so really TradFi, and the things that we were doing, the types of things that we were doing back in the day, we saw that a lot of institutional flow that was coming to us was actually asking us to give them some form of exposure to sort of whether Trump was going to win the 2016 election or lose it, or Brexit was going to happen or not. So it's kind of very specific types of questions about the future. And what we were doing is we were using traditional assets, so like options, futures, equities, to get them the exposure to the event that we're looking for. But that was super indirect, it was super expensive, and obviously very inaccessible. Not everyone can go to Goldman Sachs and ask for an exotic product. So this was sort of the genesis of the idea. So there's a financial market for pricing stocks, credit, commodities, currencies. But there wasn't one for pricing just simple questions about the future that have economic and social relevance. And realized that if we actually could build this sort of financial market could be one of the largest down the line, because it's the one that the largest number of people could relate to. And then number two, it could be one of the most useful because you're then pricing the future. You're making everybody smarter about what could happen for a variety of different things. There's going to be a hurricane in Florida, who's going to win the election, where is inflation going to be at the end of year, is the Solana ETF going to get approved? And if you get smart about these questions, you can do all sorts of things, like better decision making, better risk management, and so on and so forth. So that was really how we started the company and went into this sort of long regulatory fight / journey to get it legalized in the US.
Tarek, when did you found Kalshi, and kind of what's the rough state of the business today?
We started the company in 2019, spent around really 4 years to get it up and running. It was 3.5 years of regulatory, then another year of slowly ramping up. A regulator at the CFTC was not allowing us to go really fast. So we really properly launched it sort of around 2020, end of 2023, and today, so I think this year we're going to end up doing, I don't really know, the rate of growth is so fast that I'm not being able to project anymore. We're growing faster in every single sort of, basically the most aggressive projections that we're having every month. But the way I'll put it is I think Kalshi is safely one of the fastest growing companies in America today. And by the end of the year, we may be the fastest growing company in America.
Can you give us a rough sense of the mix of volumes between different kinds of event contracts?
So it ebbs and flows with sort of seasonality and what's top of mind. So I'll retrace sort of since the beginning. Obviously, last fall, during October, November, super election politics dominated. January is very politics, like Trump's policy, first 100 days, etc. February, the financial markets were large. So all of our crypto and just general TradFi markets, those are the things that were trading the most. And then March was sports, so that you got into March Madness, and then that was when we really launched our sports offering and we started scaling it. And now I think we see kind of a mix across the board between politics, economics, and financials, sports, and then one of our really fast growing categories, culture. So things that generally people don't, it's a complete new category of people that never sort of bet or trade on anything, but they have views about music and pop culture and so on and so forth, and that's sort of a very fast growing segment.
I will say I'm a big Morgan Wallen fan. He just launched his new album, and I bet on will his album be #1. So I've had a lot of fun on the culture actually stuff on Kalshi. Cool. So Kalshi's been one of the most successful companies in kind of unlocking regulatory barriers. You all have had one hell of a story. Crypto's obviously kind of going through its own regulatory evolution right now. Can you share some color and some thoughts on kind of the journey that Kalshi's gone through in the regulatory environment?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think crypto and prediction markets are intertwined in many ways. I think both are sort of new forms of financial systems. They also sort of have a lot of synergies, but one of the sort of ways they're very similar is they both had to fight for the right to exist. And I think crypto has done an incredible amount of progress in the last decade or so. For prediction markets, it was a little bit of a difference. We were kind of alone in this sort of regulatory fight. So when we first started the company, we realized this is illegal. The US government did not want these to be in the US. And so we had to go through this sort of excruciatingly long journey. I mean, it was really 3 years and a half of convincing policymakers and the regulators to let us sort of do this in the US in a regulated and legal way. And like people ask a lot, like, what was the secret sauce? I mean, it really was sort of relentlessness. Like, if you do something for long enough, at some point you create enough of a movement and momentum around you that people start believing you. And then the more people start believing you, they become evangelists, and then over time, and like you're seeing this with crypto right now, right? Like you had Senator Haggerty on stage right now talking about, that wasn't happening 5 years ago, right? And so it's the same sort of thing happens. You have to create a wave and push it so hard for so long that at some point the wave gets large enough that it can make a meaningful impact and start breaking down barriers. And so this is sort of, it was very simple. So this was really what happened in the story of Kalshi. For us though, especially for the election market, and this was sort of the key moment that happened last year, we did have to sue the government. So we sued the government, didn't let us do the election market for 2 to 3 years. We sued them over it. It was a very difficult decision because when you sue your own regulator, the federal government, they will hurt you in many ways. And that happened over the last few years. It was a very painful journey. But we believe we were right, and we believe this should be legal at the end of the day, and we won. And it was totally worth it. So I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Awesome. So y'all are growing super fast. You've announced some partnerships recently with companies like Robinhood and maybe some others. Can you just talk about like these partnerships? Can we expect more of them going forward? What's going to happen?
So we have a few brokers launched, and we have a dozen in the pipeline now. So I would say like...
Who's live?
So we have Robinhood, Webull Live, and a few other smaller brokers. I think by the end of the year, we're projecting another maybe 5 to 6 brokers, and I think within the next year and a half, I would say most mainstream financial brokerages, like where you have your 401ks and others, will have access to Kalshi's products, our prediction markets, in-app. And it's been amazing to see. So if you're seeing sort of this adoption of very similar to crypto, but this adoption of prediction markets in the places where people like keep their money and go to sort of check their balances and their paychecks and so on and so forth. And I think that's a critical step for us. And the results this year have been showing. The growth has been really astronomical.
All right. Next up, let's get into crypto. What exactly does Kalshi do with crypto today? Why are you here?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, like any non-traditional crypto company, I think now that the regulatory environment sort of enables us to get into crypto, we've always, in many ways, like we always wanted to be in crypto. We just didn't have legal and regulated venues to do it. And you're seeing companies like us, companies like Robinhood, companies like a bunch of others, like really leaning in very heavy in crypto. And like oftentimes, actually, Solana is sort of one of the ecosystems of choice because it's trader friendly. And we're doing the same thing. So like, I think now we're leaning in very aggressively. Like, I think the first is payment methods, payment rails. Like, if you're in TradFi and you've dealt with sort of traditional like payment infrastructure, it sucks. Fraud is very hard to manage. Conversion rates are bad. And like, at first, we launched stable coins late last year. We launched like, I think Bitcoin early this year. And this morning we launched Solana deposits, which we're super excited about. And over time, I would say like, one, access to sort of wallets. I think there's large amounts of liquidity and money just sort of on-chain. I think companies like ours want to sort of go to where the users are sitting and like basically access these wallets. Number two, I think we're going to start over time posting transactions on the blockchain, as a way to basically enable more transparent financial systems. Like in some ways right now we have on the database, we try to make it accessible on our website, but why not put it on chain and have anyone basically out there to see? And I think the third one is the thing that we were discussing a few months ago, like in this idea of modalities. Which is over time, like if we basically build a layer on chain, we enable other builders to build on top of prediction markets. And we already see it in TradFi. We would love to see it sort of in DeFi, where people are basically building like weather apps that forecast the weather based on our weather forecast, or like apps that are sort of polling apps that like use our market forecast to forecast where, who's going to win the next sort of primaries or who's going to take over Congress. And there's all these there's this entire like large application layer that can be built on top of prediction markets and the data that we have by a bunch of builders, and I can't think of a better ecosystem of builders than Solana or basically crypto more broadly. And so those are, I would say, the three sort of pillars that we're super excited about.
Is there any, Kalshi has a DCM and a DCO license from the CFTC. Is there any world in which y'all try and move some of that infrastructure on chain?
So maybe for context of the crowd, like, since Dodd-Frank, since the financial crisis, any financial instrument, financial derivative needs to be cleared by a regulated clearinghouse. And clearinghouses, what they do really fundamentally is they, move money, and then they take care of like collateral management. So if you, want to trade something that's worth $1,000, they decide how much you have to put up, and then they manage that collateral. And right now, that's done sort of with traditional banking infrastructure. And there's many reasons for it, but like if you think about it from first principles, like over time there has to be some sort of on-chain aspect to that. There has to be. Like there are things that like you want, the transparency is very important. I think the lack of reversibility is very important. And so really it's a question of, it's a matter of time. It's like a question of educating regulators and getting them comfortable with like actually you can get most of the benefits that a bank provides you without additional risk. And so why not? So I hope so. I hope the answer to that question is yes.
Prediction markets have kind of historically been popular during major cultural events, Olympics, elections, Super Bowl, stuff like that. It does seem though like we're in kind of a new regime and things are changing, and news outlets are starting to report on prediction markets. Sports betting is taking off. Long tail of markets seems to be really growing quite quickly. What changed, and like why now?
So I think two things. One is the space is now legal, right? Like that's a very simple one. Like we legalized it like 2 and so years ago, but we really sort of like legalized election markets and this whole large suite of events last year. So that was when we won the lawsuit. So now you went from a place where the space is illegal to legal. So now, yes, the press is going to report on it more aggressively. The institutional adoption is growing fast. Like, people feel more comfortable. You can accept people, without VPNs and stuff like that. And then the number two things is like, I think something has changed in the last election. There was this very key moment, and that was, I think, both true for us, Kalshi and Polymarket, our main competitor, where we were the only place where you can go and get truth about what was going to happen. So all the other polls were saying 50-50, and like the only two places that were saying there was going to be a 63% chance of Trump winning the election were Kalshi and Polymarket. And so that created, in some ways, a sort of like very sort of, intense key moment where around a very key event, very, very critical, important event where people were like realizing, holy shit, these things are incredibly powerful. They're actually useful. And it kind of went mainstream. So one number that I love to, like 500 million unique visitors came to our site on election night. So it's like 7% of the world population, I think, something like that. That's a lot of people. And I think once you see the power of these markets, you realize like, oh, well, every time I have a question about the future, I'm going to go to a prediction market. So.
Prediction markets today are still fairly simple. You got buy and sell, yes, no. How do you think about the design space for prediction markets? Are we going to have more structured trades? And how do you think about this specifically in the context of DeFi?
So right now it's yes or no questions, but I think over time, the way I think about prediction markets, it's not about like the structure. It's not about a yes or no question. It's about the underlying. So it's an underlying, it's a non-usual, non-traditional financial asset. So it's not real estate or stock or credit. It's anything. And so over time, we can see structures that are just like, hey, get exposure to COVID, right? Or short COVID, or get exposure to weather or short the weather. And that's just like an asset that sort of tracks anything that you'd like to get exposure to or you have a view on. And prediction markets are a very simple way to kind of get that view. And so yes, over time, we're basically going to expand the structures in a variety of different ways. And we're pretty excited about that. And we'll probably have some sort of new structures coming in Q3, Q4 this year. And we're going to go much more aggressively next year.
All right, and last question for you to kind of wrap things up. Are prediction markets a new form of media? Are they just entertainment, a new game? But like how can these things evolve as a media asset?
I've been thinking about this a lot. So the Kalshi view on this is that I actually think it's sort of the next iteration of financial markets. It's sort of the next step. It's the one where that sort of enables financial markets to kind of achieve the full-blown potential, which is like apply free markets to anything, any question about the future. But then that form of financial market, I think, has broad implications to society. I think it's much more intertwined with the news and media, just because it's much more dynamic. It enables you to capture anything that is in the news or top of people's mind. much more dynamically and effectively. I think it can be gamified like anything, right? Like there are a lot of platforms that have gamified access to the stock market. It doesn't mean that the stock market itself is a game, but there are ways to access it that are kind of more fun or gamified. But I really think of it as like a new type of financial market layer, sort of a next generation of financial markets that enables you to trade on anything, really. And so I think 10 years from now, I think we'll see this as like, we'll look back and realize like, there was a world where you couldn't actually trade on your opinion on any of these sort of like crazy questions about the future.
Awesome. Well, hey, Tarek, thanks so much for being here. Congratulations on the product announcements this morning. And looking forward to see Kalshi do more crypto stuff in the future.
Yeah, thanks for this. Thanks for having me.